all this mean now, Jeffrey, that has the government basically just surrendered to biotech, just thrown in the towel and said, forget it?
It's not surrender. You see, they're on the same side.
That's right, that's right.
You see, it's not like they're against them and they've given up. They actually, the WikiLeaks have showed us that they've deployed the entire State Department apparatus, which we already knew, but this kind of showed their actual tactics, where, for example, the ambassador to France asked his handlers in the U.S. to issue a retaliation list against countries in Europe that have been resistant to GMOs.
That's right.
And specifically asked them to cause some pain. Now, we know that when I was in Zambia talking to some Jesuit priests there that were involved in the Zambian decision to reject genetically modified corn from the United States, they told me that Colin Powell had tried to intervene in the Vatican to try and censure the Jesuit priests, that they had sent. I talked to one former secretary or the Minister of Agriculture there. He said when he went to shake Ann Veneman's hand, who was the Secretary of Agriculture in the U.S., she refused to shake his hand when she heard that he was from Zambia, who had rejected our GM corn, and just said backward country and walked away.
Wow. It's incredible. Now, you've been doing a lot of traveling. You spent time in India. Can you give us a quick rundown of what you saw there on the streets about the farmers committing suicide after experiencing massive crop failures due to the GMO crops there? What's going on?
Well, it turns out an investigative report by UK Daily Mail estimated in 2008 that 125,000 farmers who planted genetically modified BT cotton committed suicide because their yields were not sufficient to pay back their high-interest loans. My friend Vandana Shiva puts that number now closer to 2.5 or 250,000 farmers, and she commissioned a group that actually went door to door to 100 homes where suicides had taken place in a cotton belt, and found that about 95 out of the 100 were directly or indirectly related to the failure of BT cotton.
And I'm sorry, but isn't the method of suicide usually they drink pesticide?
They often do. They often do. It's a tragedy. I just, in fact, read an article this week that they found an official from Monsanto was visiting a town, so they brought him to an area showing that half of the seeds did not even sprout or germinate, and when he refused to acknowledge any fault, they beat him up.
Really?
And previously, other seed salesmen, like a Monsanto salesman, was kidnapped and tied up until he was released by the police. You know, the farmers, obviously, they're ruining their lives, they're ruining their communities, and not only that, but I went to one village where they allowed their buffalo to graze on cotton plants after harvest for 8 years, but when they allowed them to graze on GM, genetically modified cotton plants, all 13 buffalo died after a single day's eating. They lost 26 goats and sheep, and this was emblematic and illustrative of what's happening around the cotton belt. Sheep, goats, some cows, and buffalo are dying or having serious diseases or disorders after consuming genetically modified BT cotton plants or cottonseed cakes.
But Jeffrey, the press in the U.S. almost never covers this. Mainline media almost never reports what's going on with the suicides of the farmers, with the dead animals, with the devastating crop yields. We're all told that GMOs increase crop yields, that this is the way to abundance. This is how we're going to feed the world. I mean, why are we all being lied to so consistently? Why can't we break through that with some honest information? I mean, you're doing a great job. Alex Jones is doing a great job. I'm hoping to play my part on Natural News as well. We're trying, but we're not getting to the masses on this. What's it going to take?
Well, you know, fortunately, because this is an issue where people can respond to GMOs by not buying them, we don't need to have 51% of Americans reject GM ingredients in order for Kraft Food to say, well, we've lost half of our market share, it's time to switch. When a small percentage of U.S. shoppers were ready to avoid GMOs, we think about 5% or 15 million Americans, because there's no consumer benefits to GMOs, they either drink poison like herbicides or produce poison like pesticides, then when we see that many people rejecting GM brands, it will drop the market share of the same companies that have already removed GMOs from their European and Japanese lines, because there the tipping point has been achieved. We already saw a tipping point against bovine growth hormone in this country, where most American dairies, including Walmart, Starbucks, Yoplait, and Dannon, have removed it. So our plan is to go to the most receptive groups and to use groups like Natural News, which has been fantastic in presenting this information to very receptive people, so that people not only understand the dangers, but realize that there's alternatives, which they can buy non-GMO products very easily. And we have non-GMOshoppingguide.com to help people make healthier non-GMO choices and drive the tipping point.
Yeah, that's a really good shopping guide. I do recommend that. That's a great little downloadable guide. But doesn't this depend, Jeffrey, on honest labeling? And we have the FDA and the USDA just completely against accurate labeling of foods. They do not want people to know that there are GMOs in their foods. They're fighting this labeling tooth and nail, and the biotech industry as well, saying that, oh, if it's labeled on there, that might confuse people. People might think it's different. Well, it is different. I mean, isn't the labeling the real key issue here?
Well, I think labeling, obviously, if things were labeled, it would wipe out GMOs from the food supply, because 53% of Americans say they wouldn't eat GMOs if they were labeled, and the FDA is officially mandated with promoting the biotechnology industry, so they ignore the desire of 95% Americans who want mandatory labeling to promote the economic interests of 5 biotech companies. However, Mike, the thing is this: we don't absolutely need labeling in order to create a tipping point. Because if we now have thousands of products that are enrolled in this new non-GMO project, which is a third-party verifier for non-GMO claims. There's already 1,200 products that have been verified. Many of them bear the seal non-GMO project verified. If we can drive the health-conscious shoppers, the parents of young kids, the people who are sick, the doctors, if we can drive the most receptive demographics who are aware of these problems to choose products that are labeled non-GMO, to choose products that are organic, to choose products that don't have the at-risk ingredients from the 8 GM food crops, that would be enough, even without labeling.
Yeah, that's really key. And again, for those listening or watching, this is just crucial. If you're eating GMOs, I believe that you are subjecting yourself to a risk of poisoning through your food, and I know Jeffrey completely agrees with that. Believe it or not, Jeffrey, we're just about out of time for your segment. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yes, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine now urges all doctors to prescribe non-GMO diets to every patient. They actually indicate that animal feeding studies show reproductive problems, digestive problems, immune system problems, accelerated aging, etc. It's not enough to simply be against GMOs and be against Monsanto and be against the government. We have to be empowered to make healthier choices ourselves. We have to say it's going to be us that decides what we put in our mouths, and not the biotech industry or their enforcement wing in Washington. And so I encourage people to learn more about the dangers of GMOs and to take those steps to protect themselves, and if they have extra energy, to protect the community by sharing the information with others.
Well said. Jeffrey Smith, everybody, thank you for joining us, and you can learn more at responsibletechnology.org. That's the Institute for Responsible Technology, where Jeffrey Smith is leading the front lines fight against GMOs and for food safety. Thank you for joining us, Jeffrey. Great information as usual. Stay with